One of the most heavily requested / recommended topics that I cover while I've been making these videos is the Gurren Lagann movies. They're essentially abbreviated retellings of both halves of the series with some little extras sprinkled in, and I had never watched them before I started making these videos, so I figured I might as well give them a shot and do my best to review them. And let me just say... Okay, let me explain. You know how in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, when you finish up in the Great Plateau, you can just make a beeline straight for the final Ganon fight? If you have the necessary player skill, it's a perfectly legitimate strategy, and you even get to do a mini boss rush against all of the blighted Ganons that you would have fought if you had done the dungeons. But if you do that, you miss out on getting to experience the world and the characters, and the final fight loses everything that gives it meaning and weight. And that's basically how I felt about the movies, especially movie 2. Because I know the series so well, I was able to sort of mentally fill in the blanks in the story, but I imagine that if I had never watched the series, or even if it had been a long time since I'd watched it, I would have been incredibly confused by everything going on. And I know that pacing issues just sort of come with the territory when you're trying to condense an 8-hour series into less than 4 hours of movie, but I personally would have preferred if they had tried to reimagine the story setup entirely rather than preserve it in this sort of weird half-baked state. I might give the movies another shot someday when I'm not coming fresh off of a rewatch, but I think that pretty much I'm just gonna stick to the series. The Giga Drill Break sequence at the end was pretty cool though, I'll give the movies that. So it's probably time that I talk about Spiral Power and the way that it weaves itself into the themes of the series. To me, it's best conceptualized as the human drive to always move forward. And the thing that makes it a powerful narrative tool is that, for all of the value that it provides to humanity, you can also understand why the anti-spiral would be afraid of it. For every medical advancement that allows us to treat and prevent a variety of diseases, there's also rapid industrialization that destroys natural environments. We have information technology that allows us to connect with people across the world, but we also have corporate greed that demands ever-increasing profits at the cost of human suffering. But I believe that if you examine the grand narrative of human history, with all the ebb and flow, there is a general trend towards progress. And I think the only way that we can fail to build a better future for everyone is if we stifle the very things that make human nature beautiful. This may be a bold statement, but for my money, Viral is a character that deserves to be spoken of in the same breath as the likes of Zuko and Vegeta. He has this simple, clean character arc that is just archetypal rival, and before you say anything, I don't know what anagrams are, and neither do you. And something I find really brilliant is that the show initially presents him as a foil for Kamina instead of Simon. In a lot of ways, they're cut from the same cloth, but they just happen to be born on opposite sides of this conflict. And we can see how Viral's turning point when he realizes that he's been losing to Simon since Kamina's death parallels the flashback we get when we learn how Simon and Kamina came to be such good partners. From that moment on, he recognizes Simon's potential just as much as Kamina does, and therefore takes it upon himself to challenge Simon as much as possible so that he's the best version of himself he can possibly be. Simon and Viral's fight while in prison can really be considered a more antagonistic version of Kamina telling Simon, "Let me see you grit those teeth." And when Viral becomes Gurren's main pilot, it cements his place as the true successor to Kamina. I do like all the supporting members of Team Gurren, but unfortunately they aren't really given much to do in the story, so there isn't really anything I can say in way of character analysis, so I'm just going to be ranking their gunmen. This is purely based off of aesthetics and incredibly subjective, so let me know if your ranking is different. I'm also going to be including the Daikaiser and the King Keaton, even though they're much more fleshed out characters, just because it'll make for a more fun list. Coming in dead last is Irex Mecha. It's so bad I'm not even going to look up the name. 0 out of 10, did not understand the assignment, see me after class. And now starting the actually good ones, Jorgen and Balimbo's Twin Boken is a really strong concept, and I like the fact that it's more of like a burly defensive design, which matches their personalities. Zorthi's Gunman gets a -5 out of 10 for the name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but I like its overall design. It has more of a sleek, flowy vibe than some of the others. Up next is the King Khitan. Obviously, Khitan gets a lot more screen time and character development, but honestly, King Khitan looks like a giant metal banana. Not necessarily a bad thing, but not my favorite. Next, we've got Mo Shogun. I stan a short king who has studied the blade, and the fact that he still uses a sword even after he has shoulder-mounted rocket launchers is kind of funny to me. Our runner-up is the Kid Knuckle. It embraces the true spirit of the series, which is reject modernity, return to Monkey. And finally, today's winner is the Daikaiser. It's just got this hilarious cannon on its back. It reminds me of Mega Blastoise from Pokemon, and it's just a solid design. What's not to love? Let me be the one to say, God save the Queen. Liron inhabits an interesting narrative space where they essentially share the role of the voice of reason with Rossyu. But where Rossyu is the voice of reason for the characters in-universe to be careful, Liron is the voice of reason for the audience to understand that any preconceived notions we have about what's possible should be left at the door. They have this sort of intuitive understanding of the world that they exist in, and understand that the only way to fail is to not try in the first place. So they're always enabling whatever crazy ideas the other members of Team Gurren come up with, because it's always just crazy enough to work. Why is it that we were born? This is the underlying question that shapes Nia's character development throughout the series. She's a person who has been denied agency and her own sense of identity by her father, Lord Genome, and subsequently the Anti-Spiral. They think that they know her purpose and the reason behind her existence, but because they don't understand who she is, they're not able to control her for their own devices. And it's her refusal to allow others to define her that brings her to Team Gurren in the first place, and, of course, to Simon. It's because of her experiences that she's able to tell Simon that he shouldn't try to find identity in his relationship with someone else. That the things that truly make him special are the things that only he is able to do. And in return, he's the first person to understand her, and he sees her as a true equal. She's the only other person to pilot Lagann together with him, and it's their connection that allows them to finally defeat the Anti-Spiral. So why were any of us born? Well, that's not a question I can answer for anyone but myself. But I believe that with the help of the people that we love, we can all find that answer for ourselves. Yoko is the character in the show that I like the most compared to how little I've actually talked about her, and that's because there are some unique challenges in terms of getting relevant clips of her. My biggest complaint about the series, and in fact the only thing that holds me back from being able to regard it as perfect, is the frankly embarrassing way that Yoko is drawn and framed through a majority of the series. Lindsay Ellis explains this concept in more detail and much better in her video on Megan Fox and Transformers, but essentially, regardless of how well written a character is or how they are framed in the narrative from a writing perspective, if they're framed by the camera as a piece of meat to be ogled, that's the impression that's going to stick in the mind of a majority of the audience. Now, all of the women in the show get this treatment to a certain extent, and it's always a problem when it happens, but Yoko is by far the greatest victim of this framing, and that really sucks, because again, from a writing perspective, she's one of the deepest and most well-realized characters in the show. She's confident and badass, but also nurturing and supportive. She commands respect from her allies, but she's also willing to learn and grow through their influence. Yoko deserved better, and her treatment in the show is an enormous blemish on an otherwise thoughtful and emotionally resonant work of art. Gurren Lagann is structured into 4 major arcs based on the character with the largest sphere of influence within the show, and more specifically the character with the most influence on Simon. Kamina, Nia, Rossyu, and Simon in order. Simon learns and grows from the influence of the other 3 characters, and once he's fully realized, he is able to move on and save the universe from the Anti-Spiral. But his growth and the lessons he needs to learn can also be tracked by examining the narrated intros that are in most episodes, and the way his relationship to fate changes over the course of the show. A man who has yet to realize what his fate is. He transitions from a kid digging tunnels with no real goal in life to waging an all-out war on the Spiral King. A man who continues to fight against fate. Having lost Kamina, he questions whether they should have left home in the first place, but he finds his resolve and finishes the work that he and Kamina had set out. A man who continues to look for his own path even while being betrayed by fate. He learns of the anti-spiral and the spiral nemesis and is forced to reckon with consequences far greater than he had ever imagined. And a man who blows a hole in the fate of a universe that is ruled by the endless cycle of violence. He's finished learning and growing and is able to resolutely decide the tomorrow that he strives for. Back in episode 1, I said that I have a hard time talking about what it is that I love so much about this show. But if I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be Kamina. Then that of course raises the question, what is it that I love so much about Kamina? And that is a deceptively difficult question. And I think it all goes back to that ever-important line from episode 1. Don't believe in yourself, believe in the me who believes in you. The truly profound thing about Kamina is that, realistically, he's putting on a show for Simon's benefit. He knows he's not that mythological hero, that larger-than-life personality that can take on the world. He's just putting on a brave face so that he can inspire Simon to take action and save the day. But it's in his willingness to maintain the facade that he becomes able to live up to the legend that he's presenting. To be anything less than an uncompromising dreamer striving for the heavens would be a betrayal of Simon's potential. So that's what Kamina becomes, someone that Simon can believe in. Because I love Kamina, I can love the show. And because I love the show, I can love Kamina. It's all the same.